Welcome back into the Talmid Shorts. And you know that word Talmid is a Hebrew word that means a true disciple who desires to be what the Rabbi Jesus is. And according to 1 John chapter 2, verse 6, it says, whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. Welcome back into the Talmid Shorts. And the whole purpose of the Talmid Shorts is to provoke us to think in practical terms, to take the big doctrinal issues, the big theological issues, the biblical issues, and how do we apply them into our lives in our daily walk. And today we want to look at the issue of sin. I want to look at the issue, how does God control all of the things that relate to man's sinful actions? Well, does God reach down and compel innocent people to do evil things? What is the relationship between sin and God's providence? Okay? So we want to look at those issues because that's a question people come up. How can, if we have a loving God, we have a just God, how can he allow all this to happen? And I want to draw your attention to the book of Genesis chapter 50. So let's go into our Bible, Genesis chapter 50. And I want to look down and look at verses 15 to 21. 15 to 21. This is a well-known story. It's called, and it talks about Joseph and his brothers. So I want to draw your attention to that specifically because it illustrates the issue here. In Genesis chapter 50, and look at starting in verse 15 down to verse 21. And remember, I'm reading out of the NASB version of the Bible, the New American Standard Version. So if you're reading a New King James or another version, just follow along with me. And so we're going to be looking at what is the relationship between God's providence and sin. Is God the author of sin? So we'll look at this. Let's read this starting in verse 15. When Joseph's brothers had seen that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him? So they sent instructions to Joseph, saying, your father commanded us before he died, saying, this is what you shall say to Joseph. Please forgive, I beg you, the offense of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. And now please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result to keep my people alive. So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. I want to look at this in verse 20. And here's where I want to focus this. He says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result to preserve many people alive. So the question, how does God control all of the things, that relate to man's sinful actions? Does God reach down? Does he reach down from the heavens, and compel innocent people to sin, to do evil things? Does he do that? To ask such a question is to answer it. Obviously, the holy and a righteous God never compels men to sin. Ultimately, the relationship between God's providence and human freedom is a mystery. In theology, the term concurrence is used to express the idea that God is working in the universe, and at the same time, man is also working. God brings what we would call his providential government, to pass through real human agency. And that's what we have here in the story of Joseph. To see into this mystery somewhat, we can look at the story of Joseph. Joseph's brothers hated him because they envied his status with their father. That's why they hated him. And what did they do? They attacked him. They intended to kill him, and they wound up selling him into slavery in Egypt. That's what they wound up doing. Now, this is brothers against brothers. And God brought Joseph into a position of power in Egypt. However, and a decade or so later, the other sons of Jacob had to go to Egypt to buy grain. Why? Because of a famine. There they encountered Joseph and they were reunited. After their father died, the brothers were afraid that Joseph might take revenge on them. Joseph was assured them, however, that though they were sinning when they attacked them, God was working good through the situation. Do you understand that? And that's the problem. We have finite minds. We don't see the whole picture. And as the brothers were sinning against him, God was working through this situation. God was, listen to me carefully, God was not guilty. God was not guilty of causing them to sin, but God was mysteriously working out salvation through their sin. Now, as we come before the face of God, I'm reminded of what the Westminster Confession of Faith says. And listen to this carefully. The Westminster Confession of Faith says it this way. It expresses the mystery of God's providence this way. It says, quote, God from all eternity did by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will freely and unchangeably ordain whatsoever comes to pass. Yet so thereby neither is God the author of sin, nor is violence offered to the will of the creatures. What a comfort. It is to realize that God never sins. He never causes men to sin, and yet his purposes are not thwarted by our sins. In fact, God is able to bring good out of sinful actions. Listen to me. There is nothing that evil men can do that will prevent God from fulfilling his good intentions. I'm going to repeat that. There is nothing that evil men can do that can prevent God fulfilling his good intentions toward you and I. And I want you to remember this. I want you to remember this truth today. When confronted by evil, your own or someone else's. Let me encourage you to study the subject just a little bit further. You should read on your own Galatians chapter 3, verses 17 to 21. You should read James chapter 1, verses 12 to 18. And you should read 1 John chapter 1, verses 5 to 7. Let me encourage you to always understand God is not the author of sin.